So if you're anything like me, not only do you get stressed, but you get stressed about stress. Like there's a heavy dose of information out there about how stress is killing us in today's world, and that it's one of the big causes of this mental health epidemic that we're facing in the world. Now, we've talked before on this podcast about how to create an environment, a culture, a team culture where we are not adding to the stress of our athletes. We've interviewed guests like Dr. Bruce Perry, the world's leading trauma researcher and psychiatrist, and we've talked with him about how stress needs to be moderate, predictable, and controllable, or else it could lead to trauma. So stress and mental health, it's been a repeated conversation on the Coaching Culture podcast. Except I'd say for the last year, I felt I've been missing something. Like I understand the idea that stress can be bad for us, but I also recognize that stress, first off, it's a part of life. Like you're never going to eliminate it. It was stressful 500 years ago for the father who was struggling to harvest crops or hunt to feed his family. And it is there for me today as a father who's struggling to get my kids to and from school, to feed them and to run a business and make time for all the other things in my life that are important to me. And secondly, I kind of enjoy stress in the sense that I feel like I thrive in it. Some of my most stressful times in life have been some of the most meaningful. They've led to the most growth. So when I came across Dr. Kelly McGonigal's book, The Upside of Stress, oh boy, I mean, this just blew me away. McGonigal, who is a Stanford researcher and psychology teacher, professor, she talks in the book about how stress can be good for you if you have the right mindset. It can help you to engage and rise to the challenge. It can help you connect with others. It can help you learn and grow. I mean, this book was so good. I read the book twice in 1 month, underlined loads of it, and have been building it into some workshops that I do for some of the coaches and teams that I support. So I'm really excited to have Kelly McGonigal on the podcast the next 2 episodes. The amazing thing about these 2 episodes is this. They will actually change your life. You may not even know it, but they will change you. Just listening to this information has been proven by research to make a difference in the way people view stress and then how they respond to it. Welcome to the Coaching Culture Podcast. My name is JP Nurbin, and I am joined by my friend and co-host Nate Sanderson. I founded TOC Culture Consulting back in 2017 and started this podcast with the mission to help coaches become better leaders and to build better team cultures, and that's what we are all about. You should check out my latest book, The Culture System, if you haven't already. I guarantee you're going to love it. You can get a free chapter of the book at tocculture.com by subscribing to our newsletter, which is like the best newsletter ever for a podcast. It literally gives you the notes to each episode every week. And it also gives you a little weekly insight on culture and leadership that people just love. So subscribe at tocculture.com. Now, as I mentioned earlier, today's guest, Kelly McGonigal, she was formerly a professor of psychology at Stanford, and she has written 3 unbelievable best-selling books, The Willpower Instinct, The Upside of Stress, and most recently, The Joy of Movement. Here's our conversation with Kelly. So Kelly, one of the amazing things about this conversation today is I've had this aha moment in my journey in trying to be a better coach, better leader, better human being. And that is where I probably have spent the last few years really in this mindset of how do I minimize stress in my life? And also how do we, create an environment within my family, within my team or the teams and the coaches that I work with where the stress is, moderate, controllable, predictable. We often talk about, there was something that I was always missing, I think, in our conversations and kind of with coaches and our approach. And I feel like I figured that out when I picked up your book, and that is that we feel like stress is always bad, but it's not so, right? There's a lot of positives and benefits and upsides to stress, and you obviously talk a lot about that in your book. But I'm just kind of curious for our listeners here. what was your aha moment for
Mm.
you when you were like, down this one path of like, oh, stress bad. Now you had that change of heart and change of mindset.
Yeah, I'll tell you. So I used to teach introduction to psychology at Stanford, and hundreds of freshmen would take that class. And we had a guest lecturer who was a famous stress researcher, and it was always the last lecture before the final exams. And he would come in and give the traditional point of view about stress. It's terrible. It kills your brain cells. It'll make you die sooner. It makes you miserable. Stress is horrible. And then I would literally see these students' faces like collapse because, of course, they're incredibly stressed. They can't choose to not be stressed. They're entering the most stressful period of the academic quarter, and it's something I always felt like there was something that just was not quite right, because even though sure you can find science that says stress is bad for you, it was clear that that message was not helping. So I had the chance to take over that lecture, and I decided to try out sharing some really cutting edge research about stress that actually was coming out of researchers who were all athletes, by the way, which I think is not a coincidence. And they had started to test out the idea that if you explain to people that stress can be helpful, that it can give you energy, that if you're feeling anxious, especially before an exam, and you accept that stress and you tell yourself it can actually help you and give you energy, that it makes your stress response healthier. It helps you perform better under pressure, including doing better on exams or in athletic competitions. And it empowers people to meet future stress with more courage and more resilience. So I started sharing that research in the lecture before the final exam. And I remember it was the first time students told me they felt empowered by information about stress, because it wasn't all, if you're stressed, there's something wrong with you and it's bad for you. And there's probably nothing you can do to cope. And that lecture actually became the my TED talk, which people might have seen. That TED talk was just like an excerpt of my introduction to psychology lecture. But there were other aha moments too. But I would say the real aha wasn't just finding research that shows that stress isn't always bad. It's really this growing body of research and my own direct experience that says how you think about stress can actually change the way that stress affects you, and that we can choose to take a stance towards stress that empowers us and that empowers others. So that's what I've been working on doing, explaining how we can actually let stress bring out the best in us, even when it's stress we would not choose for ourselves, even the types of stress that any reasonable person would want to avoid, even that type of stress. Like, not like you said, the controllable, moderate stress that everybody wants, like even the really bad stuff. We can find ways to tap into our stress strengths.
We kind of like intuitively know stress, challenge, difficulties in life, like it doesn't kill us, it makes us stronger, right? Like we know this when we reflect back on our own life. But yet as parents, educators, coaches, leaders, we are now, I feel like more than ever, trying to minimize stress, to avoid difficulties for young
Yeah.
people. And
And it makes
it's,
so much sense,
yeah,
right? Like, can we just say it's from a place of compassion and caregiving,
yeah.
that there's nothing wrong with wanting other people to not experience pain, loss, trauma, self doubt, all of that. It's that this is actually something I believe very strongly is a yes and kind of mindset we need. It is totally natural to want to protect others and to support others. And also, if we get really clear, we're pragmatic and we pay attention to the consequences of how we talk about stress and how we create environments that help people experience stress and grow from stress, we can really pay attention to the words, the actions, the relationships that empower people, as opposed to focusing on trying to create a reality that we don't actually get to choose. Like, we don't, no matter how hard we try, we cannot prevent people we care about from experiencing stress. So we can turn that caregiving instinct towards something that might actually help.
You might not have an answer. I'm just curious your thoughts on this really quickly. Is just obviously mental health, mental wellness
Mm-hmm.
is huge topic, especially in sports right now, more than ever. And to say it's one thing or the other is ridiculous. There's a lot of contributing factors that we've gone into on this podcast and previous episodes. But how much do you think is this avoidance of stress or the wrong mindset? How much is that a problem? Is that something that, like, I read this book and I'm like, gosh, like, I think we're missing a big opportunity to help our young people, to help all of us through this mental health kind of like epidemic that's going on.
The way that I think about mindset and mental health is not so much that mindsets, like if you have the wrong mindset, you are making yourself susceptible to something like anxiety or depression. I think a lot of it's biological. A lot of it has to do with your environment. A lot of it has to do with the most important relationships in your life. There are a lot of things that play a role. Technology might as well. Even things like diet and nutrition can play a role. So there's so many influences. And I know myself, I know that I am genetically and biologically predisposed to anxiety and depression. So I've been there and gone through this. And so speaking from my own experience, I think mindsets are really helpful for those of us who know what it's like to suffer from mental health challenges. That mindsets actually are a tool in supporting mental health. I don't want to say that, like, if you have the wrong mindset, you're going to give yourself anxiety or depression. That's not really, it's more like if you are somebody who does have an anxiety disorder or has experienced depression, it's even more important to find ways of thinking about these inner experiences that are so difficult. What do you do when you have a panic attack? What do you do when there's a voice in your head that is like relentlessly terrorizing you, as is so often the case in something like depression? How do you find the strength to move forward if you've dealt with addiction? I actually think mindset is so important for people who have those challenges, because we know that it actually isn't possible to create some kind of perfect reality where we have exactly the right amount of stress and we can feel exactly the way we want to feel. Like, I think that actually one of the few gifts of mental health challenges is that you start to understand that it's not possible to create the ideal conditions at all times. And yet it is also possible for something like anxiety and courage to coexist, or loss and meaning to coexist, or that you can both, feel like you're alone, and at the same time, some part of you has a desire to reach out and ask for help. That we can actually use sometimes what we think of as the symptoms of stress or the symptoms of anxiety and depression. We can use them as reminders to activate our coping strengths.
Well, I wonder for our coaches, we hear this word mindset thrown around all the time. I mean, in some ways, it's almost become a buzzword that's associated with culture, right? In the sports world, everybody talks about having a great culture and athletes that have a great mindset. But when you use that word, what exactly are you describing? That, again, as adults that are trying to mentor and lead students into this discovery of how to have a more healthy approach to stressful situations, what is it that you're describing when you use this word mindset?
Yeah. So I take like the psychologist point of view, which is that there are certain beliefs that you hold about the way the world works that are so important that they can play a role in how you experience a lot of different aspects of life. So it's not, a mindset is not like a preference, like I happen to like cats more than dogs. I'm sorry. Like, that does not actually determine how my body responds in like important moments in life, unless my cat happens to walk across my desk. But a mindset is a belief you hold. For example, is it possible for people to change? That's a very important mindset. Do you believe that people in general can be trusted, or that in general people are not trustworthy? What do you think about aging? That's a really interesting mindset that predicts everything from how well people age to how long they live. So it seems like there are certain beliefs we hold that shape how our body responds to life, that shape the emotions we feel in important moments, that shape how we interact with other people and how other people perceive us, that create these kind of spirals, so that because we hold a certain belief or we choose to pay attention to a certain idea, it's like this cascade that unfolds. And can lead to really important outcomes that we care about, like mental health or physical health. So that's what a mindset is, like from a technical point of view. And it turns out that how you think about stress is one of those mindsets that can affect everything from your physiology, your biochemistry moment to moment, to how you relate to others, how others perceive you, whether you achieve goals, your physical health, all of that. But there are actually a lot of mindsets that matter. And I think the most important thing about a mindset is the reason it seems to matter is that it creates a bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy. So any mindset that really makes a difference is going to involve something where two opposing things are true at the same time. So like take that example. Are people trustworthy or are people not trustworthy? Well, we know that both are true. And you could marshal up lots of evidence for both. But if you choose to believe that most people can be trusted, how you are when you meet people, who you are in conversations and negotiations, whether or not you help other people and let other people help you, right? That is strongly determined by the choice you choose to make. And that actually changes the world around you. People will act differently based on your expectations and the way that you treat them. So stress is similar in that way, that it creates this kind of self-fulfilling prophecy. There's no doubt you can find lots of evidence that stress can have harmful effects, that stress is not always healthy for us, and also that stress can give us energy. Stress can help us grow. Stress can bring out the best in us. They are both true. They're not always both true at the same time. However, which one you choose to focus on in moments of stress can really make a difference in how you handle that stress. So I think it's important to point out these paradoxes, because there's always somebody who's going to be like, but wait, what about like that one really bad stress? Like you can't tell me that a panic attack is good for my health. No. However, I know from direct experience and from the research that if you're actually having a panic attack, telling yourself that a panic attack is the most horrible thing in the world and the only thing that like your entire job in life is to prevent or avoid or stop panic attacks, that is actually not going to be helpful. And there are other ways of thinking about stress that can be more helpful.
So I want to follow up on that a little bit because you kind of alluded a little bit before to the importance of language, and again,
Mm-hmm.
we're talking to an audience of leaders here and parents and, coaches of young people. The language that we use around the subject of stress can predispose us in one direction or another. So can you sort of unpack how do we, again, approach somebody with a compassionate lens and start to choose the more appropriate, healthier approach to the language that we're using as we ourselves are navigating, talking to ourselves to go through stressful situations or working through situations with others?
Yeah. I mean, I think one of the first ways that language can help is how we define stress. So most people define stress as a bunch of stuff I don't want. I define stress as what arises in you when something you care about is at stake. So if someone you care about is telling you, I'm so stressed, this is so stressful, instead of thinking, uh-oh, I have to fix the problem right now, which you cannot always do, or I need to make that person feel different because that stress is bad. That's a very different mindset. If we have this idea, this definition of stress as it's arising because something you care about is at stake. This is a moment that matters for you. That even that shift in definition and language can change what we choose to ask in that next moment. Like, okay, let's take a moment and think, what matters most to you right now? What do you care about? Why does this matter? How are you feeling? What do you want? What can you choose? To really think of stress as a catalyst for focusing on what your opportunity is in this moment, what your resources are in this moment, and what matters most. So that's one way to think about it. I mean, I also think that language around we know that how we talk, including our self-talk, is really important. And we often will internalize messages that we hear from people who are important to us, whether they're parents or teachers or coaches. And so some of the best ways that we can use language is to say to other people things that we ourselves would like to hear in moments of stress, which is like number one that you don't want to hear is calm down, right? Or don't be stressed. Stop it. You shouldn't feel that way. And all like the things like that. Like get it together, right? The single most positive thing that for most people in moments of stress is something as simple as you've got this. In so many types of stress, just that simple message can help people take a moment and think about what their resources are and what they can choose.
I love that, and just how the language can be helpful in helping us to maybe shift mindsets. I want to talk a little about interventions because that was one of the coolest things that came out of your book. And I mean, I felt like even reading the book was a great intervention for me.
That's how it
I
was designed. You know,
There you go.
every book I write is designed to basically have the effect that I'm writing about.
Oh,
So
okay.
yeah, it is.
Well, it
That book
did.
is a mindset intervention.
Well, it was so funny because as we were getting ready for this podcast, which I'm in Ireland, so it's it's evening now, and I had a well, first off, my wife had ACL surgery on Tuesday, so I've been taking care of her all day. I had to run, pick up three kids, bring them home, feed them, take one to football, bring them back, or come back, put the 2-year-old to sleep. And I'm like, oh my gosh, there's all this stuff. I'm so stressed. And then I had this interview at 7:30, and I'm like, this is what it's about. Here we go. It's game time. Like, this is why I meditated for 30 minutes this morning. It was so I could be awesome in this moment. And so far, everything's going well. So I don't hear any screaming or anybody killing each other. So I
You know,
think things are
by the
going
way, I
well
just want to say,
upstairs.
like, one of my favorite things to say is we've trained for this. This is what we trained for. I love that because I feel like it's something a lot of athletes can understand too. But also, it's the kind of thing you might say in any sort of moment where you need to rise to the challenge. It's what like a surgeon is going to say in a medical crisis. It's what you're going to say if you're like a trauma responder, running into a fire or whatever it is. Like, this is what we trained for. So when you were sharing what you were
Yeah,
saying with
yeah.
yourself, it's like that's one of my favorites too.
Well, I got to keep using that one. There you go. But it's powerful. Like the book is powerful. But the coolest thing, like to come back to these interventions, is like some of them don't even take. We don't need to have all our players read The Upside of Stress. Like it's mind blowing how simple these interventions are. I was wondering if you could unpack that a little bit of,
Yeah.
you know, your favorite intervention that you saw out there, and maybe a little bit of a recipe that coaches might even think about using with their own team.
Yeah. So one of my favorite interventions was looking at helping students who might be arriving at a competitive school and feel like they don't belong. And so the intervention at the beginning of it takes place in their freshman year, was to come in and read a few stories that had been written by other students at that school about how when they arrived, they felt like they didn't belong. But over time, as they got to know people and explored their experiences, they realized that they did belong. And the point of the intervention was like, a lot of people feel this way. And if you feel this way, it's not evidence that you don't belong here, which is how like most people think. Okay, so, but the best part of the intervention, and I feel like this is the magic ingredient. So if coaches are thinking, how am I going to share some of this stuff? The magic ingredient is they then ask those freshmen, like, if has this been true for you in any way? How do you think about this? And could you please record a little video sharing this idea that we might be able to show to the incoming students who haven't gotten here yet? So if any of this resonates with you, could you just like talk a little bit about that from your own experience? And we're going to show it to students even before they get here. By the way, they actually did do this. Like it worked. And so they turned it into things that were shared with incoming students. Um, so that was like the secret of any great mindset intervention is you tell people things that are true and you root it in research and stories. Super important. Give people a statistic. Like, for example, one of the statistics I like to share with people is that even though most people think stress makes you perform worse, that actually chemical measurements of things like adrenaline actually predict doing really well under pressure. That often the more stressed out you are, the better you do. That always surprises people. They always think there's like some perfect level of like calm but slightly energized. It's pretty linear. Like the more you got those stress hormones going, the better you do, particularly if you've trained for it. Okay, so you get some science in there, and then you get some stories. So you got people sharing, like, for example, the best exam I ever took in my life was when I overslept and I woke up like 15 minutes before the end of a major exam in a college class. And I jumped up, I ran to class, They let me start taking it, but I had to finish it by the end of the period. And in 10 minutes, I raced through an hour-long exam, got an A on it. And I remember thinking it was the adrenaline. Like if I hadn't had such an enormous stress response, there is no way I could have performed the way I did in that moment. Okay, so anyways, things like that. I'm just like trying to demonstrate. Get a little science, you get a little stories in there, and then you ask people, is this true for you? So like I might ask you, either of you, has there ever been a moment in your life where you felt like the stress that you felt actually helped you do your best? And if you're able to think of an example like that and share it, that just seals the deal. Can I ask, is that like, do you have a story like that?
So it was in my 130-kilometer ultra that I did back in June, and I'm 70 kilometers in. And this is a tough one. Like the checkpoints, our cutoff times are sharp. And I knew I was always going to struggle to complete this ultra based upon the times. I wasn't so much worried about the distance this one. And I remember being 70 kilometers in and I'm just suffering. I'm in so much pain and I'm miserable. And like for a whole like 10 kilometers, a couple hours, I'm just lagging. Like I'm just like the flight response is just going hard. It's just like, oh, just give up. And just like, you're not going to make it. And then finally it's like, what do you think this was going to be easy? And I had this moment of like, it was stressful, it was painful, but like I completely flipped it and I had this huge adrenaline rush. And I'm like, I was a crazy human being. I will just say that. Like if I was yelling, I was like cussing myself out. I was like, let's go, like dropping a few
Yeah.
F-bombs in there and stuff like that. And I just start taking off and I start running the race like I should have. And if I hadn't done that, I wouldn't have made the checkpoint. I made it by a minute into the 102-kilometer checkpoint. Had to sprint like a bit, but it was like incredible.
You know what I love about
sprinting.
that story, right? It's, there was part of you that was kind of ambivalent about it, right? This is hard. This is horrible. And then some part of you was like, wait a minute. I wanted this. I chose this. And when you reconnected with that why, that motivation, your body had a stress response. I mean, it's such a classic demonstration that stress is often your body and brain trying to help you rise to a challenge, to do what matters most to you. Stress is not a sign that there's something wrong, that you aren't enough, which is young people have gotten this message that if you are stressed, that stress itself is something you need to triage. Like, oh no, we can't be stressed. And so if you're stressed, you shouldn't be here. You need to quit this activity. It's too stressful. You need to take a break. You need to it actually, young people have been told to move away from their goals because of the fear that stress itself is such a toxic, untenable state. And like your story is such a good example of no, often stress is about the part of you who cares saying, all right, let's do this. And it's such an important mindset reset. The other thing I wanted to say, I love that story, but I realized, we've been talking a lot about one particular mindset reset, which is this idea of embracing stress as energy. But the one thing that's really important about stress, and in the book, I have these 3 different sections, is there are a bunch of different beliefs that are really useful. And this really only works when you can get them all in there. So the one we haven't talked about is how important it is to not try to do everything by yourself, to actually reach out to others and use stress as a catalyst for connection. So I do want to mention, like, that's if I were doing a mindset intervention over time with a team or a group of students, as I sometimes do, it's so important to get all those messages in there so that you don't end up with people who feel like they have to be superheroes without sidekicks and support systems, right? You can't create people who think it's always their job to rise to the challenge, to be amazing, to perform under pressure. You also need that same person to understand sometimes stress is bigger than you and you need to find the team to do it with. You need the people who care about you, who can support you. You might need to talk about it with someone. That part of what stress does for us is it can push us in that direction as well. And then, of course, we talked a little bit about that growth mindset, but that's such an important one too, to think of stress as a opportunity to learn and to reflect and to make decisions about how you want to change or how you want to grow moving forward. those are the three big mindsets that I think of. There's another one that I would have added. It's not in the book, but like the pandemic has really made it clear that sometimes stress will make you want to choose joy. Like there'll be some part of you that just wants to, put on your favorite song and sing it as almost like resistance to whatever is going on, the stress in your life. And I actually think the part of you that wants to choose joy as like defiance or as empowerment or as hope, that is also a stress instinct. And like that's something, I mean, as a team, I think you could probably design that into a lot of team experiences.
Okay, we are going to break there for this episode. Next episode, we will be back to explore more on how to help use stress to get our team to connect. Also, some personal disciplines we can have in our own life to help us keep the right mindset. And we'll talk about Kelly's latest book, The Joy of Movement. Thanks for listening. Be sure to subscribe to the podcast wherever you listen. And also head on over to tocculture.com to subscribe to our weekly newsletter there.